I watched them through the bay window, laughing, as they unloaded her designer suitcases from his Mercedes. My husband Daniel and the woman he'd been seeing for the past 6 months. Vanessa, his executive assistant. They looked so carefree, so comfortable in my driveway beside my carefully planted hydrangeas, approaching the front door of my house. A house that, as far as Daniel knew, was ours. I sipped my tea slowly from the window seat of the coffee shop across the street, the perfect vantage point for this bizarre spectacle. 3 weeks ago, I'd moved out without a word, not a single text or note. I'd simply vanished, taking only what I could fit in 2 suitcases, leaving everything else behind. My personal documents, my grandmother's jewelry, and most importantly, the deed to the house, safely transferred to a lockbox only I could access. Daniel hadn't bothered to file a missing person report. Not that I expected him to. Our marriage had been unraveling for years, held together by dinner parties, joint investments, and the persistent illusion of success. What I hadn't anticipated was how quickly he'd move his girlfriend in once I disappeared. Before I continue with what happened next, where are you watching from today? If this story touches something in you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special just for you. Another tea, Claire? Keller, the barista, appeared beside me, coffee pot in hand. Claire, please, I reminded her with a small smile. And yes, that would be lovely. From my perch by the window, I had a perfect view as Daniel fumbled with his house key, Vanessa pressing herself against his back, her lips on his neck. They were practically giddy. The house was empty, the wife was gone, and now they could play house together in a $2.3 million Victorian in the most prestigious neighborhood in town. If only Daniel had paid more attention to the paperwork when we'd purchased it 5 years ago. If only he'd noticed that the deed was solely in my name, a protective measure I'd insisted upon after watching my mother lose everything in her own divorce. Daniel had been too preoccupied with impressing our realtor with market predictions to bother with such minor details. My phone vibrated with a text from my lawyer, Meredith. Meeting confirmed for tomorrow, 10 a.m. All documents ready. Are you certain you want to proceed this way? I typed back quickly. Absolutely. Let them enjoy the weekend first. My gaze returned to the house just as they disappeared inside, the front door closing behind them. I could picture it perfectly. Vanessa's wide eyes taking in the crown moldings, the marble foyer, the grand staircase. Daniel playing tour guide, probably embellishing about the vision he'd had for the renovations, conveniently forgetting it was my inheritance that had paid for them. I glanced at my watch. By now they'd have discovered that most of my belongings were still there. My clothes still hung in the closet, my books still lined the shelves, my perfume still arranged on the vanity, an abandoned life preserved like a museum exhibit. Daniel would be confused but relieved, assuming I'd left in a hurry and would eventually come crawling back. He didn't understand that I'd left those things behind not out of haste but calculation. Everything in that house had been inventoried, photographed, and legally documented by my team. Every item would become evidence of what was about to unfold. The barista, Jenny according to her name tag, refilled my cup and gave me a curious look. You've been watching that house for a while. Friend of yours live there? I took a sip before answering. Actually, I do. Or did. It's complicated. Jenny's eyebrows raised slightly. Sounds like there's a story there. There is, I conceded. But it's still being written. Preparing and narrating the story took a lot of time, so if you're enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to what happened next. I'd met Daniel 12 years ago at a charity fundraiser for the hospital where I worked as chief financial officer. He was charming, ambitious, handsome in that manufactured way that speaks of careful grooming and expensive haircuts. As the newest junior partner at Preston and Blackwell Investment Group, he was eager to impress, dropping names and figures with practiced ease. I was impressed, but not for the reasons he thought. Behind his smooth veneer, I recognized something familiar. The same desperate hunger for success that had driven me from my small-town beginnings to the executive suite. The same determination to never look back, to climb higher, to prove something to the world. We were married within a year, a perfect merger of ambition and assets. For a while it worked beautifully. We renovated the Victorian, hosted the right parties, joined the right clubs, made the right investments. Daniel's career flourished, and he eventually made senior partner. I orchestrated our financial portfolio with the same precision I brought to the hospital's books, quietly building a safety net that Daniel rarely questioned. It was during the 7th year of our marriage that the first cracks appeared. Daniel started coming home later, his explanations about client meetings growing vaguer. The cologne he wore changed subtly. His phone became a closely guarded possession. Classic signs, so predictable they were almost insulting. I hired a private investigator, not out of jealousy or even surprise, but out of a practical need to assess the situation. The reports confirmed what I'd suspected. Dinner meetings that extended to nightcaps at hotel bars, weekend conferences that involved only minimal attendance at actual conference events. Still, I held my cards close. Confrontation wasn't my style. It only gave the other person an opportunity to prepare their defenses. Instead, I started making preparations of my own. My phone buzzed again. This time it was Sarah, my best friend and the hospital's legal counsel. "How's the surveillance going?" "Need backup." I replied, "All clear for now." "They're inside. Dinner tonight." Sarah had been my confidant throughout this entire process. She'd helped me prepare for the long game, setting up the network of professionals I'd need. Forensic accountants, investigators, specialized attorneys. She understood why I couldn't just walk away or confront Daniel directly. Some betrayals required a more sophisticated response. Across the street, an upstairs light flickered on the master bedroom. I could imagine Vanessa exploring, running her hands over my Egyptian cotton sheets, opening my closets, perhaps wondering if she should suggest to Daniel that they clear out my things. After all, I'd been gone for 3 weeks without a word. Surely I wasn't coming back. What they didn't know was that I'd been watching the house all this time, documenting their comings and goings. I had footage of the first night Vanessa had stayed over, just 3 days after my disappearance. I had recordings of them bringing in groceries, wine takeout. I had timestamp photos of them kissing in the driveway, entering, and leaving together at hours that made it clear she wasn't just visiting. All evidence of abandonment of the marital property, of disrespect for the marriage, even before any formal separation. Evidence that would prove valuable very soon. The real twist came 6 months ago when Daniel was passed over for managing partner. The position went to Eliza Chambers, a brilliant strategist with an impeccable track record. Daniel had been furious, convinced he'd been robbed of what was rightfully his. He began spending recklessly. A new car, custom suits, lavish gifts for himself and, as I would later discover, for Vanessa. Unknown to Daniel, I'd been tracking our finances meticulously. I watched as our joint accounts dwindled while my separate accounts, the ones he didn't know about, remained untouched. I observed as he made increasingly risky investments, trying to prove himself worthy of the position he'd lost. And I said nothing, allowing him to believe I was still the supportive, somewhat naive wife who trusted his financial acumen implicitly. What Daniel failed to realize was that I'd been the financial backbone of our marriage from the beginning. My salary had always been higher, my investments more conservative but ultimately more profitable. The down payment for our house had come from my savings, the renovations from my inheritance when my grandmother passed away. I'd kept these details subtle, knowing how important it was for Daniel to believe he was the primary provider. My phone lit up with another text from Sarah. "Just got off the phone with Marcus. He says Daniel's investment group is underwater. Several major clients pulling out after that PR disaster." I knew all about the PR disaster. Preston and Blackwell had been caught in a scheme involving inflated returns and misappropriated funds. Daniel wasn't directly implicated, but the stain spread to everyone at the firm. Their stock was plummeting, clients were fleeing, and Daniel's own investments, tied closely to the firm's performance, were in free fall, which explained his increasingly desperate moves. I'd noticed large withdrawals from our joint savings account, money being moved into high-risk ventures. Daniel was trying to gamble his way out of trouble, unaware that I'd already protected the bulk of our assets. I finished my tea and left a generous tip for Jenny. It was time to move to the next phase of my plan. As I walked to my car, not the luxury SUV Daniel knew, but a modest sedan I'd purchased through a shell company months ago, I took one last look at the house. Our house. My house. Tomorrow, Daniel and Vanessa would leave for what they thought would be a romantic weekend at his family's lake house. They'd return on Sunday evening to find the locks changed, a security system they couldn't disarm, and legal notices plastered to the door. But that was tomorrow. Tonight, I had dinner with Sarah, followed by final preparations with my legal team. The endgame was approaching, and timing was everything. At the upscale restaurant where Sarah waited, I checked my reflection in the window, composed, confident, not a hair out of place. Nothing in my appearance suggested a woman whose marriage was imploding. Nothing revealed the calculated fury beneath my carefully maintained facade. "You look terrifyingly calm," Sarah observed as I slid into the booth across from her. "I don't know whether to be impressed or concerned." "Be impressed," I said, accepting the glass of Cabernet she'd already ordered for me. "Everything is proceeding exactly as planned." Sarah leaned forward, lowering her voice. "And you're certain the house is legally yours? No loopholes he could exploit?" "Absolutely certain. The deed is in my name only. I paid the down payment from my separate account. I handled all the property taxes through my personal accounts. Daniel's name doesn't appear on a single document related to ownership. And he never questioned this arrangement?" I allowed myself a small smile. Daniel has always been more interested in appearances than details. As long as he could boast about our house at dinner parties, he never bothered to verify whose name was actually on the deed. Sarah shook her head, both amused and appalled. "Men like Daniel never see women like you coming, do they?" "That's what makes this possible," I replied, studying the menu though I already knew what I would order. "He underestimated me from the beginning, first as an asset, then as an opponent." The conversation paused as our server approached. We ordered, maintaining the appearance of two friends enjoying a casual dinner. Once we were alone again, Sarah pulled out her tablet, switching to business mode. "I've reviewed all the documentation from the forensic accountants," she said. "Daniel has been systematically moving money from your joint accounts into private ones for the past 8 months. Some of it was used for gifts for Vanessa, jewelry, weekend getaways, that sort of thing. But the bulk appears to be an attempt to shield assets in anticipation of a potential divorce." I nodded, unsurprised, which plays perfectly into our hands. Hiding marital assets is frowned upon by divorce courts. "There's more," Sarah continued, her expression grim. "He's been lying about the firm's stability. Preston and Blackwell is under federal investigation, rumors of indictments coming within weeks. Daniel's position is particularly vulnerable." This was new information, but it didn't change my strategy. If anything, it accelerated my timeline. Daniel would be even more desperate now, more likely to make mistakes. "Do you think he moved Vanessa in so quickly because he's about to lose everything?" Sarah asked, "Setting up a backup plan?" I considered this, taking a measured sip of wine. "Possibly. Or perhaps he truly believes I'll never come back. Either way, it demonstrates his character, or lack thereof." Our food arrived, and we ate with the efficiency of two professionals accustomed to working lunches and strategic dinners. Between bites, we finalized details for the coming week. The locksmith scheduled for tomorrow afternoon, the security team on standby, the formal notices prepared by Meredith. "What about your personal items, still in the house?" Sarah asked, signaling for the check. "Aren't you worried about what might happen to them?" "Everything of true value, financially or sentimentally, is already secured," I assured her. "What remains is either replaceable or strategically left behind. Besides, we have detailed inventory and photographic evidence of everything in that house. If a single item goes missing, it becomes another point in our favor." Sarah studied me with a mixture of admiration and concern. "You've thought of everything, haven't you?" "I've had years to prepare," I replied simply. Later that night in my temporary apartment, a sleek, minimalist space in a secure building downtown, I reviewed the final preparations for tomorrow. The locksmith was confirmed for 2 p.m., when surveillance confirmed Daniel and Vanessa would be well on their way to the lake house. The security team would arrive at 2:30 to install the new system and remain on site until Sunday evening. Meredith would deliver the legal notices at 3 p.m., ensuring everything was properly documented. I opened my laptop and checked the tracking app I'd installed on Daniel's phone months ago, another piece of insurance I'd never expected to need. The dots showed him at our house, my house, presumably settling in for the night with Vanessa. Tomorrow morning, they'd pack for their weekend getaway, blissfully unaware of what awaited them upon their return. As I prepared for bed, I felt no sadness, no regret, not even anger anymore. Those emotions had burned away months ago, leaving only cool determination in their place. Daniel had made his choices. Now it was time for him to face the consequences. My phone buzzed with a final text from Meredith. Everything in place for tomorrow. Last chance to reconsider approach. More conventional options still available. I typed my response without hesitation. Proceed as planned. They deserve the weekend of false security before reality hits. Setting my phone aside, I slipped between cool sheets and closed my eyes. Tomorrow would mark the beginning of the end for Daniel's comfortable illusions. By this time next week, he would understand exactly who he had betrayed. Not the compliant, supportive wife he thought he knew, but a woman who had anticipated his every move and prepared accordingly. A woman who owned the very ground beneath his feet and was about to reclaim it. Morning arrived with a clarity that matched my state of mind. I rose early, completed my usual fitness routine, and dressed with particular care. A sleek charcoal suit that projected authority, pearls that had been my grandmother's, subtle makeup that enhanced rather than concealed. Today wasn't about confrontation. Daniel and Vanessa would be long gone before any of my team arrived at the house. Today was about preparation, about setting the stage for Sunday's revelation. My phone buzzed with a text from my surveillance contact. Subject's loading car now. Estimated departure within 30 minutes. Perfect timing. I gathered my essentials and headed out, not to the house, but to Meredith's office for our final briefing. As I drove, I allowed myself to picture Daniel and Vanessa's faces when they returned from their romantic weekend to find themselves locked out of my home, legal notices demanding their immediate and permanent departure. The thought brought a small, satisfied smile to my face as I emerged onto the highway, heading toward the next chapter of my carefully orchestrated plan. Meredith's office occupied the 15th floor of a gleaming downtown high-rise, all steel, glass, and intimidating professionalism. The reception area of Harper, Chun, and Associates featured sleek furnishings, strategic lighting, and not a single family photo or personal touch. This wasn't a place that specialized in amicable divorces or friendly separations. This was where you came when you needed legal warfare conducted with surgical precision. Claire, Meredith greeted me, emerging from her corner office exactly on time. Her handshake was firm, her smile genuine but restrained. At 52, Meredith Harper had built her reputation as the most feared divorce attorney in 3 counties. She specialized in cases where one spouse had significantly wronged the other, infidelity, financial deception, abandonment. Judges respected her, opposing counsel feared her, and clients like me valued her ruthless efficiency. "Confirmation just came through," she said as she led me into her office. "Your husband and his companion departed the residence approximately 12 minutes ago. Our surveillance indicates they're headed toward the lake house as expected." I nodded, unsurprised. Daniel was nothing if not predictable, a quality that had once been comforting but had ultimately made this entire process almost too easy. "The locksmith is scheduled for 2 o'clock," Meredith continued, consulting her tablet as we sat at her conference table. "Security team at 2:30, and I'll personally deliver the notices at 3 o'clock. She glanced up. "You're certain you don't want to be present?" "Absolutely certain," I replied. My presence would only create an opportunity for confrontation. Better to let the legal documents speak for themselves. Meredith nodded approvingly. She appreciated clients who understood strategy over emotion. "Now, let's review the documentation once more," she said, spreading several folders across the table, each labeled with meticulous precision. Property deed, financial evidence, infidelity documentation, abandonment of marital property. For the next hour, we methodically went through each folder, ensuring every document was properly prepared, every photograph dated and authenticated, every financial record verified. The case we were building wasn't just about reclaiming my house. It was about ensuring Daniel couldn't contest any aspect of the divorce settlement I would eventually offer. "The judge assigned to your case is Crawford," Meredith noted, making a small annotation on her legal pad. "She has little patience for infidelity, and even less for financial deception. The evidence of Daniel moving his girlfriend into the marital home so quickly after your disappearance, without filing any missing person report, will not go over well." "And the Denton file?" I asked, referring to the discreet investigation we'd commissioned into Preston and Blackwell's financial troubles. Meredith slid another folder across the table. Fresh this morning. The SEC investigation is accelerating. 3 senior partners have already received target letters. Daniel isn't among them yet, but his department is under particular scrutiny. I scanned the report, noting the projected timeline for potential indictments, the specific transactions being investigated, the clients who had already withdrawn their investments. Daniel's professional world was collapsing around him, and he had no idea I knew. How much time does he have before this becomes public? I asked. 2 weeks, 3 at most, Meredith replied. When it breaks, the firm's stock will plummet further. Any investments tied to their funds will be essentially worthless. I closed the folder, a new piece slotting into my understanding of Daniel's recent behavior. That explains the sudden liquidation of our joint investments last month. He's trying to get ahead of the crash. Moving assets before a divorce filing is problematic enough, Meredith said. Moving them while aware of pending federal securities charges is considerably worse. Our forensic accountant has tracked 3 separate transfers to offshore accounts in the past 6 weeks. Can we prove Daniel knew about the investigation before making those transfers? Meredith's smile was small but satisfied. His personal email to Vanessa from February 12th. The SEC is sniffing around Fletcher's division. Need to move quickly before this blows up. I raised an eyebrow. You have access to his personal emails? Let's just say Vanessa's cloud storage security is significantly less robust than it should be for someone with access to potentially sensitive financial information. Meredith replied with professional detachment. Also, she really should know better than to use her work computer for personal communications. By noon, we had finalized all preparations. The locksmith and security team were confirmed, the legal notices prepared and notarized, and a detailed inventory of all items in the house updated one final time. What happens when they return on Sunday and find themselves locked out? I asked, though I already knew the answer. They'll call you, obviously, Meredith replied. When that fails, they'll likely call a locksmith themselves, at which point they'll discover the new security system and the legal notices. The notices clearly state that any attempt to enter the property without your express permission will constitute trespassing. Given that the deed is solely in your name, and Daniel has been documented moving another woman into the property, his legal standing is extremely shaky. He'll be furious, I noted without particular concern. Undoubtedly, but fury doesn't change legal reality. Meredith gathered the folders, returning them to her secure cabinet. We've arranged for a security detail to monitor the property Sunday evening through Monday morning, just in case he decides to test the boundaries. As our meeting concluded, my phone buzzed with a text from the surveillance team. Subjects arrived at Lake House 11:42 a.m. All clear at primary residence. Everything's on schedule, I informed Meredith. They've reached the Lake House. She nodded, walking me to her office door. I'll call you when everything's completed this afternoon. In the meantime, I suggest you proceed with your day as planned. Best to establish normal patterns of behavior. My normal pattern for today included a scheduled lunch with the hospital board chairman, followed by a meeting with the underwriters for our new expansion project. Everyone at work believed I was in the midst of a trial separation, a simplified version of the truth that explained my temporary change of address without inviting unwanted questions or pity. As I left Meredith's building, I felt strangely light, as though I'd set down a heavy burden I'd been carrying for years. In many ways, I had the weight of Daniel's deception, my silent knowledge of his betrayal, the careful maintenance of our facade of marital harmony. All of it was finally being shed, replaced by the clear lines of legal procedure and financial disentanglement. My phone buzzed again as I reached my car. This time it was Sarah. Lunch still on for 1:30? Have updates on Dee's workplace situation. I texted back a quick confirmation. Sarah's position as the hospital's legal counsel gave her access to information networks that complemented my own. Her updates were always valuable. The restaurant Sarah had chosen was deliberately casual, a farm-to-table cafe tucked between a bookstore and a boutique florist in the city's arts district. Not the kind of place Daniel or any of his colleagues would frequent, which made it perfect for our purposes. Sarah was already seated at a corner table when I arrived, her typical corporate attire exchanged for weekend casual, though even her casual maintained an elegance that spoke of careful curation. "You look suspiciously serene for someone in the middle of dismantling her marriage," she observed as I sat down. "I prefer to think of it as reorganizing my life," I replied, accepting the menu from our server. Once we'd ordered, Sarah leaned forward, her voice lowered. "So, Richards, you know, my contact in the Financial Crimes Division, called this morning. The Preston and Blackwell investigation has expanded. They're looking at potential RICO charges now." I set down my water glass carefully. "Racketeering? That's more serious than we thought." Apparently some of the senior partners were running what amounts to a Ponzi scheme for certain high-value clients. "The house of cards is collapsing spectacularly." Sarah's expression was grim. Daniel's department was handling some of these special accounts. Even if he wasn't directly involved in creating the scheme, he had to have known something wasn't right. This complicated matters, potentially for the better from my perspective. If Daniel faced criminal charges, his ability to contest our divorce or make claims on my assets would be severely compromised. "Timeline?" I asked. "Grand jury convenes next week. Indictments likely within the month." Our food arrived, momentarily pausing the conversation. As we ate, I considered the implications of this new information. Daniel was not just facing a divorce and the loss of his home, he was potentially looking at criminal charges, professional disgrace, and financial ruin. A normal person might feel some sympathy, some residual concern for a man they'd spent 12 years married to. I searched my heart and found none. Daniel had made his choices, professional and personal, with a cavalier disregard for consequences. Now those consequences were arriving, and I felt no obligation to shield him from them. "Any word about Vanessa's involvement?" I asked, spearing a forkful of salad. Sarah shook her head. "As far as we know, she's just the executive assistant who became the girlfriend. No indication she's involved in the financial issues, although..." She hesitated. "Although what?" Richards mentioned something interesting. "Apparently, Vanessa was previously employed at Meridian Capital, another firm that came under SEC investigation 3 years ago. She left just before the scandal broke." I filed this information away for future reference. Whether Vanessa was merely attracted to powerful, corrupt men or actually involved in their schemes was unclear. Either way, she'd hitched her wagon to the wrong horse this time. "What time is the locksmith arriving?" Sarah asked, changing the subject. 2:00. Everything should be completed by 4. Sarah studied me over her iced tea. "And you're really just going to let them return to a locked house with no warning? No conversation?" "What conversation would you suggest?" I countered. "Hello, Daniel. Just wanted to let you know that the house you moved your girlfriend into is actually mine, and I'd like you both to leave immediately." "When you put it that way," Sarah conceded with a small smile. "Besides," I continued, "this approach sends a clearer message. Daniel needs to understand that I've been 3 steps ahead of him this entire time, that every move he thought was so clever was anticipated and countered before he even made it." "Remind me never to cross you," Sarah said, only half joking. After lunch, I drove to my temporary apartment to prepare for the afternoon's operations. At precisely 1:45 p.m., I received confirmation that the locksmith was en route to the house. At 2:10, the first photos arrived on my secure server, close-ups of the new deadbolts being installed, the old keys rendered useless. By 2:40, the security team had arrived and begun installation of the new system, one that required both a code and biometric confirmation for entry. My fingerprints and retinal scan were already programmed as the only authorized access points. At 3:05, Meredith texted, "Notice is posted on all entries." Copies sent electronically to Dee's email and delivered physically to his office. "Security confirms installation complete. Property secured." I released a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. It was done. My house was reclaimed, legally and physically. Now came the waiting game. To occupy myself during this interlude, I focused on practical matters, reviewing the hospital's quarterly financial projections, preparing notes for Monday's budget meeting, answering work emails that had accumulated over the past few days. I deliberately avoided checking the surveillance feeds from the house or Daniel's location. There was nothing more to see until Sunday evening. That night, I treated myself to a rare indulgence, ordering in from my favorite sushi restaurant, opening a bottle of exceptional sake I'd been saving, and watching a film I'd been wanting to see. Small celebrations for small victories. The true confrontation was still to come. Sunday arrived with unexpected serenity. I spent the morning at a yoga class, followed by brunch with an old college friend who knew nothing of my marital situation. The normality was refreshing, a reminder that life continued beyond the drama currently unfolding in my personal sphere. By late afternoon, however, my focus had shifted back to the impending confrontation. According to the tracking data, Daniel and Vanessa had left the lake house at 3:17 p.m. Their typical drive time would put them back at the house between 5:30 and 6 p.m. At 5:15, I received confirmation that the security team was in position, unmarked cars at strategic points with clear views of all entrances to the property. Their instructions were clear: observe and document, but intervene only if there was an attempt to forcibly enter the house or if the situation escalated to potential violence. At 5:42, the notification I'd been waiting for. Subject's vehicle approaching neighborhood. ETA at property approximately 3 minutes. I settled into the chair in my home office, iPad propped on the desk, displaying the feeds from the security cameras now positioned around my house. Split screens showed the driveway, front entrance, back door, and side gate. Everything was quiet, peaceful for now. At 5:46, Daniel's Mercedes turned into the driveway. I watched as he and Vanessa emerged from the car, laughing about something, completely unaware of what awaited them. They unloaded their weekend bags from the trunk, and Daniel led the way to the front door. The first hint of trouble came when his key failed to turn in the lock. I observed his confusion, the repeated attempts, the growing frustration. Vanessa said something, gesturing at the door. Daniel tried again, more forcefully this time. Finally, he stepped back, running a hand through his hair in obvious frustration. Vanessa pointed to something, the legal notice prominently affixed to the door. Daniel ripped it off, holding it closer to read in the fading evening light. Even without audio, I could track the progression of his reaction, confusion giving way to disbelief, then anger. He crumpled the notice, threw it to the ground, then pulled out his phone. I knew exactly who he was calling. On cue, my phone began to ring, Daniel's name and photo appearing on the screen. I let it go to voicemail. On the security feed, I watched him leave another furious message, his third in as many minutes. Vanessa was on her phone too, perhaps calling a locksmith or researching what to do when locked out of your home. The expected text arrived moments later. What the hell is going on? Why are the locks changed? Call me immediately. I didn't respond. There was nothing to say that the legal notices hadn't already communicated. Daniel's next move was predictable. He stormed around to the back door, Vanessa trailing behind, only to find it similarly secured with a matching legal notice. His body language conveyed his escalating rage, the tight shoulders, the clenched fists, the aggressive stance. When he returned to the front yard, he was already on his phone again, likely calling a locksmith. I knew exactly how that conversation would go. The security system we'd installed was registered with all local locksmith services. Any legitimate business would refuse the job once they ran the address through their system and saw the legal hold. Sure enough, Daniel's expression confirmed my prediction. Whoever he was speaking to had clearly declined his request. He ended the call with visible anger, then immediately dialed again. Same result, judging by his reaction. Vanessa appeared to be growing uncomfortable, hugging herself as the evening air cooled. She said something to Daniel, who snapped back at her before returning to his futile attempts to contact me. By the 10th call, all sent straight to voicemail, Daniel had progressed to pounding on the front door and shouting. The security team texted an update, subject becoming volatile. Neighbors taking notice. Security prepared to intervene if necessary. I texted back. Hold positions unless property damage occurs or physical threats made. Just as I sent this instruction, Daniel appeared to have a new idea. He returned to his car, rummaged through the trunk, and emerged with what looked like a tire iron. My heart rate increased slightly. Was he actually going to try to break in? Before he could approach the house, however, a police cruiser turned onto the street, slowing as it neared my property. One of the neighbors must have called in a disturbance. Perfect. The officers approached Daniel, who was still holding the tire iron. A brief conversation ensued. during which I could see Daniel gesturing wildly at the house, likely claiming it was his home, that he was locked out. One officer examined the legal notice, while the other spoke into his radio, presumably running the address to check property records. The encounter ended exactly as I anticipated. The officers clearly informed Daniel that the property was registered solely in my name, that the legal notices were valid, and that any attempt to enter without permission would constitute criminal trespassing. They instructed him to remove his vehicle from the driveway and leave the premises. Daniel's fury was evident even on the small screen, the red face, the aggressive posturing, the finger pointing. But against uniformed officers with clear property records, his rage was impotent. Eventually, he stormed back to his car, Vanessa hurrying behind him with their weekend bags. As they drove away, I received a final text from the security team. Subjects departing area. Officers remaining to file incident report. All documented. I set down my phone and leaned back in my chair, letting out a long, slow breath. Phase 1 complete. My phone buzzed again, Meredith this time. Police report being filed. Officers confirmed legal notices properly served. Security staying in position overnight as planned. Well executed, Claire. The last sentence brought an unexpected sense of satisfaction. Yes, it had been well executed, from the meticulous documentation of Daniel's infidelity to the strategic timing of my disappearance, from the careful monitoring of his financial maneuvers to today's reclamation of my property. Every step calculated, every reaction anticipated. I knew what came next. Daniel would regroup, consult attorneys, and attempt to mount a counteroffensive. He would discover that his options were severely limited by the property deed, the evidence of infidelity, the documented financial deceptions, and now the police report regarding his attempt to enter my house with a potential weapon. But that was tomorrow's battle. Tonight, I would sleep peacefully, knowing that Daniel and Vanessa were scrambling to find accommodations, their romantic weekend shattered, their sense of security demolished. My phone buzzed one more time. A text from Daniel, his final attempt of the evening. You won't get away with this. You have no idea what you're up against. This is my house, too. I smiled faintly at his predictable bluster. How little he knew. How little he had ever known about me, about my capabilities, about the careful groundwork I had been laying for years. I typed back a single reply, the only communication I would offer him until our lawyers met formally. Check the property deed, Daniel. You never owned a thing. Then I turned off my phone, poured myself a glass of wine, and settled in for a quiet evening alone. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new strategies to implement. But tonight, I savored this small victory, the first public move in a game that had been silently unfolding for months. Daniel had always underestimated me. By the time this was over, he would never make that mistake again. 1 year later, I stood at the window of my executive office on the top floor of the hospital's new wing, the expansion project I had spearheaded now completed ahead of schedule and under budget. My promotion to chief executive officer had been announced the previous month, culminating years of strategic career advancement. The morning's business news had included a small item about Daniel's sentencing, 15 years in federal prison, forfeiture of all assets, and restitution payments that would extend well beyond his release. Vanessa had reportedly testified against him as part of her own immunity agreement, revealing that their relationship had begun not as a romantic connection, but as a strategic partnership to conceal financial misconduct. I felt no satisfaction in this news, no vindictive pleasure in Daniel's downfall. Those emotions had burned away long ago, replaced by the cool clarity that had guided me through each phase of my response to his betrayal. What remained was simply recognition of natural consequences. His actions had produced precisely the results that should have been expected. My assistant knocked lightly on the open door. Your 10 o'clock is here, Miss Keller. The investment committee for the new oncology center. Thank you, Jennifer. I'll be right there. I gathered my presentation materials and took one last look at the view from my window, the city spread out below, opportunities extending in every direction. My house remained my sanctuary, my career continued its ascent, and my life proceeded on the path I had carefully constructed. Daniel had moved his girlfriend into my house, never bothering to read the deed that would have revealed his vulnerability. That single act of carelessness, born of arrogance, entitlement, and underestimation, had set in motion the complete dismantling of his carefully constructed facade. I closed my office door and headed toward the conference room, my steps measured and confident. The past was properly archived, its lessons incorporated but its hold released. Ahead lay possibilities limited only by my vision and determination. A future built on the solid foundation of knowing exactly what I owned, what I was worth, and what I was capable of achieving. Daniel had learned those facts too late. I had known them all along. I hope you enjoyed today's story. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below what you thought of the story. See you in the next video.